Imagine waking up one morning and learning that overnight, one of the most powerful military machines on the planet had launched a strike that changed the entire geopolitical map of the Middle East, not just targeting a weapons facility or a military base, but decapitating the leadership of a nation of 85 million people. That is exactly what happened on the 28th of February, 2026, and the world has not been the same since. For years, the tension between Washington and Tehran had been building like pressure in a sealed chamber. Every failed nuclear negotiation, every drone attack on a U.S. ally, every ballistic missile test had been another turn of the screw. But what was about to unfold on that Saturday morning went far beyond anything analysts had predicted, even in their worst-case scenarios. This is the story of Operation Epic Fury, the moment the United States military, alongside Israel, unleashed its most consequential strike package in the Middle East since the invasion of Iraq in 2003. To understand how we arrived here, you have to go back to the slow-motion collapse of diplomacy. For months, American and Iranian negotiators had been meeting in back channels, trying to construct a deal that would keep Tehran from crossing the nuclear threshold. The Americans came to the table with an offer, a civilian nuclear program, backed by American investment in exchange for the complete dismantlement of Iran's enrichment capabilities. Tehran refused. Iranian negotiators reportedly boasted in private sessions that they had deceived international inspectors for years, and in Washington, the conclusion hardened. Diplomacy was exhausted. But this is where things become more dangerous. While diplomats were still talking, both militaries were already moving. Beginning in late January 2026, the United States began deploying assets on a scale not seen in the region in over 2 decades. 2 full carrier strike groups repositioned toward the Persian Gulf and the eastern Mediterranean. Carrier Strike Group 3 and Carrier Strike Group 12, each a floating city of firepower, carrying dozens of fifth-generation aircraft, cruise missiles, and Aegis-equipped destroyers, took up position within strike range of Iranian territory. The USS Gerald R. Ford, one of the most powerful warships ever constructed, was repositioned off the Israeli coast, its air wings fueled and loaded, its refueling tankers staged at Ben Gurion Airport to extend the operational range of every aircraft on its deck. 14 U.S. Air Force tanker aircraft were counted on Israeli runways alone. At the same time, the U.S. Fleet headquarters in Bahrain was quietly reduced to fewer than 100 mission-critical personnel, and all American naval vessels departed Bahrain's ports. Intelligence analysts and former military officers watching satellite feeds recognized these movements immediately. They were the same pre-strike signatures observed before the U.S. hit Iranian nuclear sites in mid-2025. What happened next changed everything. On the 28th of February, as the clock approached midnight in Tehran, the sky above the Iranian capital erupted. A coordinated wave of American B-2 stealth bombers operating out of Diego Garcia in the British Indian Ocean Territory and RAF Fairford in England delivered massive ordnance penetrators, bunker-buster bombs designed to collapse fortified underground nuclear facilities that no other weapon in existence can reach. Simultaneously, salvos of Tomahawk cruise missiles were fired from destroyers and submarines scattered across the Gulf and Red Sea, each one programmed to strike a specific node in Iran's military-industrial network. F-22 Raptors, the most advanced air superiority fighter on Earth, swept ahead of the strike packages, suppressing Iranian radar and air defenses before a single bomb fell. It was a choreographed symphony of destruction, years in the planning, executed in hours. The primary target of the operation, its most decisive blow, was the compound of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of the Islamic Republic of Iran, the man who for over 3 decades had been the ultimate authority over every Iranian missile, every proxy militia, every nuclear centrifuge. He was killed in the opening hours of the strike. Within hours, the same fate had been confirmed for multiple senior Iranian military commanders and Revolutionary Guard officers. The heart of the Iranian regime had been cut out in a single night, but no one in Washington or Tel Aviv believed the story would end there. Iran's response came fast and in volume. Within 48 hours, Tehran launched waves of ballistic missiles and swarms of armed drones across the entire region. U.S. bases in Kuwait and Bahrain were struck. Qatar's Al Udeid Air Base, one of the largest American air installations on Earth, housing thousands of U.S. and coalition personnel, came under attack. Saudi Arabia's Patriot missile batteries began firing, intercepting volleys aimed at the kingdom's oil-rich eastern province and the Prince Sultan Air Base. The UAE's Patriot and THAAD systems tracked dozens of incoming Iranian drones, though 9 managed to break through and land on Emirati soil. Qatar issued an elevated threat alert, ordering residents indoors. The entire Gulf was at war. The Strait of Hormuz, the narrow 21-mile-wide channel through which nearly 20% of the world's oil supply travels each day, became a battleground. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy, operating fast attack craft and mine-laying vessels, moved to shut the strait down entirely. The IRGC fired on and boarded commercial vessels, warning that any ship wishing to pass would need Iranian permission first. A Thai-flagged bulk carrier, the Mayuri Nuri, was struck and set ablaze. A Japanese container ship sustained damage to its stern. A Marshall Islands flagged carrier was hit 50 nautical miles northwest of Dubai. Oil prices, which had already been climbing for weeks, broke through $100 a barrel for the first time in years. The International Energy Agency, in an emergency session, authorized the release of 400 million barrels of crude from global strategic reserves, a record disbursement made necessary by the scale of the disruption. And this is where the human cost of the conflict becomes impossible to ignore. By the 12th day of the war, confirmed deaths in Iran numbered over 1,200. In Lebanon, where Israeli strikes targeting Hezbollah positions had intensified dramatically in parallel with the Iran campaign, more than 600 people had been killed and 800,000 displaced from their homes. In Israel, Iranian missiles had triggered sirens across Tel Aviv and central Israel, though the combined Iron Dome, David's Sling, and Arrow missile defense systems intercepted virtually all incoming warheads. Inside Iran, the damage to infrastructure, power grids, fuel depots, ports, military airfields was catastrophic. Strikes on Iranian oil facilities sent a toxic plume of black rain downwind across populated areas, prompting emergency warnings from the World Health Organization. The U.S. alone claimed to have struck over 5,000 targets in Iran within 12 days, asserting it had destroyed 80 to 90% of Iran's operational Navy and Air Force. But among all the strikes, one in particular would haunt the opening chapter of this war. A Tomahawk cruise missile, part of the enormous barrage unleashed in the opening days of the operation, struck a girls' school in Iran. Approximately 175 students were killed. The U.S. military launched an immediate investigation into the incident, and the White House confirmed it would accept the findings. The image of that school, flattened in the rubble of a war launched by superpowers, became one of the defining moral questions of the conflict. A reminder that regardless of the strategic justifications on either side, the cost of modern warfare is always paid in part by those who never chose it. Internationally, the reaction fractured along predictable fault lines. Russia condemned the strikes as illegal under international law and a violation of the UN Charter's prohibition on the use of force. China echoed those concerns, with Beijing watching closely as its longest-standing Middle Eastern energy partner convulsed in flames. The United Nations Security Council passed a resolution condemning Iran's retaliatory strikes on Gulf states, but conspicuously said nothing about the American and Israeli opening blow. The United Kingdom authorized U.S. bombers to operate from its base at Diego Garcia and RAF Fairford in a supporting capacity, framing its involvement as limited and defensive. Australia pledged missiles to the United Arab Emirates and deployed a surveillance aircraft to the theater. NATO watched from a careful distance, acutely aware that escalation beyond the Middle East into something involving Iran's arms relationships with Russia could pull the entire alliance into the crisis. Inside Iran itself, something unexpected was happening. Mojtaba Khamenei, the son of the slain supreme leader, was quickly elevated to replace his father, a historically controversial move given his lack of senior religious credentials, so significant that Iran amended its own constitution to permit it. Hundreds of thousands rallied in Tehran in support of the new supreme leader. The foreign minister declared Iran would fight for as long as necessary, but beneath the public displays of defiance, a regime that had already survived devastating internal protests in January 2026, protests that killed thousands and briefly paralyzed the country, was now fighting simultaneously on the streets and in the skies. Its proxy network had been badly degraded. Hezbollah had been weakened by years of Israeli attrition. The Houthis in Yemen, for all their solidarity statements, had not directly joined the fight. Hamas was shattered. Iran was more isolated than at any point since the revolution of 1979. The question now was not whether the Iranian military could stop the American air campaign. It clearly could not. The question was what kind of Iran would emerge on the other side of this war and what kind of Middle East would be left for everyone else to inhabit. The strategic calculation behind Operation Epic Fury was clear in its ambition. Eliminate the Iranian nuclear program before it crossed the point of no return, degrade the military machine that had been launching proxies and missiles across the region for 4 decades, and if possible, accelerate the collapse of a regime already teetering under the weight of economic ruin and internal unrest. Whether that calculation proves correct will depend on what happens in the weeks and months ahead, whether a successor government in Tehran can consolidate power, or whether the country fractures, whether a ceasefire can be brokered before the Strait of Hormuz closes entirely and the global economy bleeds, and whether the signal sent to every other state with nuclear ambitions resonates or provokes. For now, the fires are still burning over Tehran. The missiles are still flying. Oil tankers are diverting around the Arabian Peninsula in voyages that add 2 weeks to every journey. The world is recalibrating its understanding of what American military power is willing to do when diplomacy reaches its end. And somewhere in the wreckage of one of history's oldest civilizations, the most consequential question of our age is still being written. What comes next?